I was so excited. In January of this year, my first Forbes article was published. It was about the reinvention of Steve Jobs. I began the article with this vivid memory that I had 30 years ago at the Boston Computer Society when Steve Jobs came to introduce the Apple Lisa. New England Hall was packed. Excitement filled the air. This was Apple's first computer with a graphical user interface. Computer history was being made. Well, I sent the article to Jonathan Rottenberg. Jonathan is the founder of the Boston Computer Society. He wrote me back. He said, "Nice article, but Steve Jobs wasn't there. It was John Couch." Now I'm saying, no, absolutely no, Jonathan, wrong. I vividly remembered Steve Jobs. Jonathan, you must have made a mistake. And it not only was my memory, but a well-known journalist by the name of Harry McCracken, who now writes for Time magazine, 5 years ago, he wrote in a blog his memory too. He was first wowed by the Steve Jobs Lisa demo as well. So I emailed Harry. I said, "Harry, what's up? I mean, Jonathan said this didn't happen." 5 minutes later, Harry emails me back. He said, "Jonathan's right. The blog is wrong." Apparently, he discovered the error several years ago, but never corrected the blog. So all of a sudden, I come to the realization that my first Forbes article was wrong. But it gets worse. Guess how I began my book? The first line of the book, I was spellbound the first time I heard Steve Jobs speak. 7,500 books at the printer, all of them wrong. Ay vey. Well, time for a pause. We all struggle sometimes. And in a world that is growing ever more complex and changing ever more rapidly, the job of leadership gets harder and harder. Just ask Jim McNerney about the Boeing Dreamliner, or Jerry Cahill about Carnival Cruise Lines, or Bill Lynch about selling a product that's becoming obsolete at Barnes & Noble, or Ron Johnson, who was just fired at JCPenney. And I'll bet each of you have had your own struggle moments as well. The question is, how do we thrive through all that chaos and adversity swirling around us? Over the past several years, I've interviewed a number of extraordinary leaders from all sectors, from business, government, nonprofit. And I asked them to tell me their stories of the most intense struggles. Through their narratives, a mosaic appeared of how great leaders navigate through challenge and adversity. This morning, I'd like to share with you the Cliff Notes version of that. And in doing so, introduce you to a new leadership lens. I call it the struggle lens. But to see this lens clearly, we need to remove the shackles that society has placed upon us. Because society, of course, sees struggle as a negative, a sign of weakness or incompetence, something to be embarrassed or ashamed about or even denied. But we all know that struggle is a natural part of leadership. Dick Schultz said it best when he said there's not been a year in his 45 years with the company that has not been beset with struggle. Now, he told me this in 2011. Little did he know what 2012 would bring. But Dick also said, with every episode, there is a learning opportunity. And when we move from thinking about struggle as this negative that society teaches us into the learning opportunity that it really is, that's when we begin to see all of the new possibilities. A friend of mine, Joe Badaracco, taught a class at the Harvard Business School looking at leadership through the lens of literature. Instead of the normal case studies, his class studied works of literature. Death of a Salesman, Things Fall Apart, A Man for All Seasons. And from this study, he came up with a 23-word concept of leadership that serves as the foundation for the struggle lens. Leadership is a struggle by flawed human beings to make some important human values real and effective in the world as it is. Now, some of you may immediately resonate with this concept. Others may be skeptical at first. But either way, it introduces us into two narratives of leadership. First, the leadership narrative that we normally see, the traditional leadership narrative represented by this yellow vase. But hidden in the background are two faces looking at each other. The struggle lens, the human side of leadership. Now, the traditional lens has a lot of advantages. It teaches us all about goals and how to achieve them. It teaches us what to do and how to do it. But the problem is that this traditional lens, it thinks struggle is a bad thing. And there's this myth that there is such a thing as a perfect leader. Well, we all know that that's not true, but when we struggle, we find ourselves feeling alone. The struggle lens teaches us, no, we are not alone. Nobody is perfect. And struggle has been central to the human condition throughout the ages. It's not a negative. It is an opportunity for growth and learning. The struggle lens goes beyond simply the how and the what of leadership to ask the most important question, why? Why are we doing this? Which are the real important human values do you choose to make effective in your leadership? And when we're going 90 miles an hour blindly in pursuit of those goals, the struggle lens asks us to take a step back, to pause, to ask the question, what are the values underlying those goals? Are they the right values? Are they the right goals? And when we move beyond thinking about struggle as some four-letter word to embracing it as an art to be mastered, that's when the magic starts happening. Now, of course, the first step to mastering any art is to understand the basic elements that we're dealing with. In my research of 151 episodes of leadership struggle, I found that there were three common elements that were evident in every struggle story I heard. First, something was changing. Second, that created a set of tensions. Third, those tensions threw the leader off balance. Now, you might be out of balance emotionally. You could be angry, or you could be depressed or filled with self-doubt. Or you might be out of balance physically. Your sleep patterns might be interrupted. One female executive told me that she was so stressed, her hair started falling out. Or you might be out of balance spiritually, crisis of purpose or meaning. Or the imbalance might be social, undermining the very relationships that are so important to you. The important point is So often, when we're in the midst of this struggle, we don't know that we're out of balance. So what the struggle lens teaches us is the first step is to notice, is to pause, breathe. And once we do that, we can begin to untangle all of the chaotic tensions that are swirling around us. We can draw a leadership tension map. My research found 4 tensions that were evident in the struggle stories that I heard. Tensions of tradition deal with the past. Tensions of aspirations deal with moving forward. Tensions of relationships are when trust breaks down, and tensions of identity when our core being becomes in question. Who are we? Let me illustrate by Joe Dowling's story. Now, of course, we know Joe Dowling is the artistic director here at the Guthrie Theater. But the story that he told me was when he was the artistic director of the Abbey Theatre, the National Theatre of Ireland, back in 1978. He was 28 years old. Things got off to a rocky start. There were differences at the very beginning when he realized that he had a different assumption than the board about the role of the artistic director. He saw the artistic director as the captain of the ship, the CEO, the person in charge. The board had a 100-year tradition. They were the stewards of the national cultural treasure chest of the country of Ireland. They are the ones who called the shots. The artistic director simply executed. And we see from the get-go a set of different assumptions or traditions causing clash. There were never any relationships. There was never any trust. It all came to a head several years later when the Abbey got into financial difficulty. The board issued a mandate: cut costs. Joe, seeing himself as in charge, demanded that the board back down. Of course, they refused. This created this intense conflict within Joe. Non serviam, he said, quoting James Joyce, "I will not serve that which I no longer believe." Joe's tension map, a flaming ball of red, high on all 4 points. The tragedy of this situation is that at the time, Joe didn't see something that would have been very obvious to an objective observer: that there were 2 underlying values that were never discussed. The board saw financial prudence as the most important value in this situation. Joe saw artistic excellence as the most important value from his perspective. And had they had a conversation about those 2 important values, they could have reached some conclusion. In fact, that's what Joe told me. He said, had I treated them as my colleagues instead of my enemies, we could have found a workable solution. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Now, fortunately, not all tension maps look like this. Kathy Taitch's tension map, when she became the chief merchant of Target, back right as we were entering the financial crisis, looks very different. You see none of the relationship tensions or none of the tensions of identity, mostly around the horizontal axis of time, of change. The important thing is that our tension map can actually teach us how to navigate through the tensions that before were swirling around us in this chaotic mix, but now become more clear. The other thing we can learn about struggle is what script we're on. My research found that there were 6 scripts in leadership struggle. Let me illustrate just a few today. The stumble, recover, and learn script. That was my script. with my book ordeal. 9:35 p.m. that Sunday night, the last Sunday in January. Sherry is not home. She's out of town. I am all alone. I am pacing back and forth. What am I going to do? I'm thinking to myself, for crying out loud, I wrote the book on struggle. I should know how to deal with this. 12 a.m., I convinced myself I need to go to sleep. 1 a.m., I'm still tossing and turning, a sleepless night. 4 a.m., the pause moment, the moment of clarity. I knew what I needed to do. I needed to notify Forbes, and I needed to notify my publisher immediately. Turned out the news wasn't all that bad, because Forbes was able to correct the article. It was an online article, and just a very few sentences changed, made it factually correct. My publisher had good news as well. Yeah, the books had been printed, all 7,500 copies, but they hadn't been bound or collated, but were scheduled to be bound that very afternoon. Had I called 1 day later, everything would have been different. As it worked out, we were able to slip in a very minor change, and the launch proceeded as planned. Just 1 day later, and we might have had a breakfast, but there might not have been books. The important thing about this stumble, recover, and learn script, and what I learned again by experiencing it myself, is stick to the script. If you stumble, make sure you recover quickly, repair the damage, and learn not to do it again. Joe Dowling can teach us about a couple of different scripts in leadership struggle. First, the burnout script. This was the script he was on at the Abbey Theater. The burnout script begins when our performance is hampered because we don't see the situation clearly enough. Our relationships deteriorate. The energy drains from us. We become exhausted. Everyone around us becomes exhausted. As the burnout script progresses, we either leave or are fired. The important thing is, if we can recognize the burnout script early enough, we can choose a different script. If we don't, then the next time around we can do it differently, which is what happened when Joe came to the Guthrie. He chose a different script, the reinvention script. No longer was Joe the captain of his own ship, following his own leadership. He became a more inclusive and collaborative leader, recognizing, celebrating, and appreciating the contributions of others. Joe channeled his energy adaptively, and in doing so, not only realized his full potential as a leader, but also elevated our entire community as well. Through his reinvention, Joe tapped into a quality that I believe is within all of us. I call it adaptive energy. Learning how to cultivate adaptive energy is central to the art of struggle. But it's a skill that requires much practice. Adaptive energy helps you cope with the ever-changing, ever more complex world. It gives you the resilience that you need to pick yourself up when you're down, the agility you need to learn and discover new things. Unfortunately, so often, baggage is in our way. Fears and old tapes keep us from being fully present in the moment. The best way to get rid of the old baggage and cultivate adaptive energy is by learning about two patterns of human thought, what Danny Kahneman calls System 1 and System 2. I call it our reflective mind and our automatic mind. Each of these minds have different personalities. Let me introduce you. Our automatic mind is fast and associative. It's good at many things, but unfortunately, so many times it locks us into old, dysfunctional patterns of the past. The automatic mind is overconfident and very often ignores crucial feedback, which it impulsively interprets as a threat, as opposed to an opportunity to see the situation anew. In the mindfulness tradition, they call the automatic mind monkey mind. The reflective mind is slower, more logical, able to see connections between cause and effect. Unfortunately, it's got one problem too. It is a lazy bugger. The key to cultivating adaptive energy is to train your reflective mind to take control when it needs to break out of the old patterns, to see the situation anew. So often, blind spots interfere with adaptive energy. My research found 5 leadership blind spots. Let me illustrate just a few this morning. The first, the experience blind spot. That's what happened to Ron Johnson at JCPenney. Now, Ron Johnson was a very, very, very successful executive at Apple. But when he came to JCPenney, he fell into the experience blind spot, which is the product of an automatic mind that's overactive and a reflective mind that's underactive. In the experience blind spot, our own success of the past gets in the way of our current functioning. Ron thought he had all the answers. He had in his head what turned out to be a disastrous pricing strategy. And before rolling it out to all 1,100 stores at JCPenney, he was asked, "Why don't you test this in just a few stores?" His answer: "We didn't test at Apple." Here, our automatic mind sees very clearly the similarities, but it doesn't see the differences. We need our reflective mind to take a step back, to get us to see the differences as well. And only when we see the nuanced pattern of the similarities and differences can we formulate the right action. Another leadership blind spot is the conflict blind spot. Here, our automatic mind races to the conclusion that we are in the right and the other person wrong. They are wrong. Our entire perceptions are organized around that distorted reality. The key to breaking out of the conflict blind spot, again, to get our reflective mind to take control, training us to see the other person not as our enemy, but rather as a colleague who is a struggling and imperfect human being, just like we are, who may have a different set of values that they feel important, but if we get together in some dialogue, we can find some common ground. The struggle lens also teaches us one way to transcend conflict is through compassion and healing. A good example is the story of how Best Buy CEO, the new Best Buy CEO, Yubari Lee, extended an olive branch to Best Buy founder Dick Schultz. Now, we think of Dick Schultz as this larger-than-life figure, but he's a human being just like everyone else. We can imagine how embarrassed he felt about the Brian Dunn episode, we can imagine how hurt he must have felt when his board asked him to resign as chair. We can imagine his emotions as he saw the board go ahead and select a CEO who had no retail experience and who he had never met. Schultz rebuffed Yoli's attempts to meet for 3 full months. But when the two finally did meet, Yoli approached Dick not as an angry shareholder who was trying to take over the company, but rather as a human being, treating him with respect and honor for his role as the company founder. Yoli handed Dick his resume and proceeded to apply for the job again as CEO, even though he had been granted the job by the board 3 months earlier. Dick Schultz would later say that this simple gesture of respect meant so much to him. And as we know, Dick is now back in the fold at Best Buy, fully aligned with company values and objectives. I give Hubert Yoli a lot of credit for the way he handled this. He could have beat his chest. He could have told Dick Schultz who was the boss. But instead, he approached the situation with compassion and empathy, allowing Dick to return to Best Buy with his head held high, bringing much-needed closure and healing to a very difficult situation. We now have a foundation for the mastery practices in the book. Starting from the conditions of struggle, we channel our energy adaptively, first by becoming grounded, training our reflective mind to take control, entering a growth mindset that sets the stage for learning and growth, centering ourselves, gaining the support we need, sorting out the tension map. And that allows us to explore all of the new pathways that were not obvious to us before. And then our adaptive energy deepens. Our reflective mind and automatic mind work gracefully together, one happy couple. And it becomes a virtuous cycle. The more we use adaptive energy, the more effective we are as leaders, the more capable we are, the more adaptive energy we get. More begets more. There are 15 master practices in the book, and I invite you to delve in. So far, we've talked a lot about the individual level, but I'd like to turn very, very briefly to the organizational implications, which I think there are many. Struggle lens can guide our organizations to accelerate leadership development by focusing on the key pivotal learning opportunities. It can foster organization dialogue by teasing apart the goals and values in conversation, perhaps finding a new solution. These are the conversations I am having now, and I invite you to join in. But I also invite you to do one additional thing. That is, of course, in addition to reading my book. I'd like to ask you that the next time your automatic monkey mind is impulsively racing to the conclusions, take a step back. Get your reflective mind to take control. Break out of that pattern. Try something new. And when you do that, I invite you to send yourself a smile, because you'll know that you'll have taken that first new step towards channeling your energy more adaptively, your first new step towards embracing and mastering the art of struggle. I'd like to close with one final thought. inevitably, we find that our struggle brings us gifts. My book ordeal brought me 2 gifts. First, timing. It was a miracle that this error was discovered when it was, because just one day later, everything would have changed. Such a gift. The second is the gift of community, because I saw a community that was rallying to my support, a community that wanted to help out in my time of crisis. And so I invite you to look for and find the gifts in your struggle. And when you see them, it's my hope that you use them wisely. Thank you very much.